I'm going to begin by just doing a quick reading from the Language of Letting Go, the daily meditation book. I posted it on Facebook this morning, and it's a reading from today about your higher power. God, a higher power as we understand God, is our source of guidance and positive change. It doesn't mean we're not responsible for ourselves. We are, but we aren't in it alone. Recovery means we don't have to look to other people as the source to meet our needs. They can help us, but they are not the source. As we learn to trust the recovery process, we start to understand that a relationship with our higher power is no substitute for relationships with people. We don't need to hide behind religious beliefs or use our relationship with a higher power as an excuse to stop taking responsibility for ourselves and taking care of ourselves in relationships. But we can tap to and trust the power greater than ourselves for the energy, wisdom, and guidance to do that. Today, I will look to my higher power as the source for all of my needs. Good reading. Okay, tonight, to finish the series on grief, we have our wonderful grief counselor, Pat Obst, who is traditionally, she usually finishes up the series. So I'm going to turn things over. I'm going to mute myself and turn things over to you, Pat. You have to unmute. Go get him, Pat.
There we go. Hi, folks. Yes, some of you probably have heard me in the past because Vince and I have been doing this. I'm the caboose um, with the grief series for the last couple of years. Yeah, I'm a grief specialist here at Starting Point. I'm hoping that all of you got a lot out of the first three. It was three, right, Vince, that you did of the grief series. And I'm hoping to add some understanding and perspective to loss and grief here tonight. I really want to focus on the processing of our grief. We've all heard, oh, trust the process. But when it comes to grief, it's really not just trusting the process, but actually working the process. So I'm going to talk more about that tonight, as I'm sure everyone here has had some level of loss in their lives. And sometimes we don't realize that maybe there's some processing that still needs to be done or some unfinished business around our loss. So I'm going to dig in here tonight. So there's a quote I share with my clients sometimes. When life gives you lemons, make lemonade. Now, if you're coming in off of a fresh loss, you want to hit me in the face when I say that. I say to my clients, just hold on and hear me out. Lemonade is actually a very good metaphor for the grief process. When we make lemonade, we squeeze the lemons and all the juice pours out into the pitcher. Now, that juice is sour, it's bitter, it's even painful to the glands under our jaw. That's very similar to early grief, raw pain, anger, frustration, sadness, sour and bitter, not something we would want to partake in, nor would we want to drink just lemon juice. To continue to make the lemonade, we pour water in. Now that dilutes the sour lemon juice, but it's kind of plain, it's kind of bland, it's blah, it's uninteresting. And that's really as we go further out and get away from so much of the raw pain of our grief, we're just putting one foot in front of the other. We're going through the motions. We're doing what we have to. Life is just kind of black and white. There's no color and joy. We've diluted the pain a little bit, just like when we pour the water into the lemons, we've diluted that sour, bitter juice. Then, as we get further along in our healing and we get to the point where we're able to begin to recreate our lives after loss, on my website, my tagline, so to speak, is grieving, healing, recreating life after loss. So we really need to go through that process. Um, with lemonade, the last part is adding the sugar, the sweetness, the joy, the refreshing part of it. In grief, when we start to recreate our lives, now we're engaging with the living. We can experience joy again, and we learn to let joy and misery coexist. We're making new memories. So when we make lemonade, there's lemons, water, and sugar. Now it's refreshing. We want to drink it. But we didn't get rid of the bitter lemons. It's still in there. But we were able to add things to it to make it tolerable and even refreshing. Same thing with our grief. We don't get rid of our loss, just like we don't get rid of the lemon juice. But we learn to add things to our lives so that we can tolerate our losses and live with them as it's just part of our story. So in doing this, we have to process it. We have to digest it. So another kind of analogy to look at is our digestion when we eat. When we eat, we have to choose to look at what's on our plate. We have to choose to pick it up. We have to choose to put it in our mouth. We have to choose to chew, and we have to choose to swallow. And then our digestion kind of does its thing that nature has taught it to do. And we're able to allow the process of separating out waste from nutrition. That's how our digestion works. Now, I'm going to get to how that works in grief. But if we don't allow for that process in our grief, we can develop what's called prolonged grief disorder. Now, only up until the last couple years, we didn't have a diagnosis for what people went through when they had a loss and when they were grieving. Now, in the diagnostic manual for psychology, we do have a diagnosis when people kind of get stuck, and that's called prolonged grief disorder. And I want to read from the manual what those symptoms are, because I think it's important for us to understand if we're stuck and where we're stuck. So, one is intense yearning and preoccupation. This is a persistent and intense longing for the deceased or constant preoccupation with them. I have a client whose child died tragically in front of them. And sometimes that kind of trauma can keep somebody preoccupied with the death and preoccupied with that person. So that's something to keep in mind if trauma has been part of I mean, like a major intense PTSD kind of trauma. Another place that people get stuck is with avoidant behavior. They avoid the reminders of the deceased person, including places, people, situations. This is normal early on. The triggers, we go by a restaurant where we used to go with our spouse, and it triggers the loss. That's normal early on, but some people can get stuck in that, where they even avoid going outside of the house, which then turns into more of a dysfunction. A third thing is emotional numbness and disbelief. That's a strong sense of disbelief regarding the death. It's an emotional numbness and a difficulty accepting the loss. Again, I think, I'm sure, Vince, in some of the lecture that you gave, you talked about denial. This is normal for a while, but we have to come to a point of acceptance. Acceptance is not that you're okay with it. I had a client who lost her adult son, and she said to me, "Well, I guess I just have to learn to be okay with it." And I looked her in the eyes and I said, "Do you really think you're ever going to be okay with your son dying?" She said, "No." I said, "Okay. So we need to change your definition of acceptance." And acceptance is really a cooperation with what is. And what is cooperation? Working with. So we have to work with this thing, not deny it. We have to work with it, with the loss. Again, people can get stuck there. Number 4 is identity disruption, feeling that a part of ourselves has died or losing a sense of identity. Again, early on, perfectly normal. I have people who've been caregivers for a long time, and part of their identity was tied up in being a caregiver. And now they don't know what to do with themselves. That's normal for a while. Um, but when you get stuck in that where you feel like you have no identity for a long period of time, then again, that's prolonged grief disorder. Functional impairment, inability to function at work, school, or in social settings, a feeling that life is meaningless. This is where sometimes medication is needed. When I went through a divorce in my early 30s, I was a youth pastor at a United Methodist church, and I was in charge um, of taking 30 teenagers into the Appalachian region for a mission trip. And I knew that I had to have my head on straight. So I went on Zoloft, which is an antidepressant, for about 6 months because I needed that in order to function. And so sometimes, medication is needed for a time, just to get through that function part, with our grief. The last one is emotional pain, intense anger, bitterness, sorrow, and an inability to experience positive emotions. When we get so tied up in blame of ourselves or blame of others, the woulda, coulda, shouldas, all of that, we can be so tied to the emotional pain that it's like this fortress where good things in life can't even come through. So I hope that gives you an idea of what prolonged grief disorder is. Um, and that if we ever get stuck in any of those parts, that's when it's really important maybe to reach out, uh, to therapy. There's actually some specific therapy treatments for this diagnosis. So some people tap into that as well. So when we get stuck in that, I'll call it PGD, prolonged grief disorder. When we stay in that, we're staying stuck in what we call victim mode. And in victim mode, you can't access resilience. Resilience is adaptability, flexibility. We all know we have to adapt in life or we won't survive. There's a tool that's a coaching tool called the 7 levels of resilient energy. The first 2 levels, 1 and 2, are what we call catabolic energy. Think catatonic. You can't move. You're paralyzed. There's no growth. There's no movement. That's called victim mode. Blame of self, blame of others, blame of the universe, the life's unfair, all of that. And we can stay really stuck in that and not be able to access resilience. Level 3 through 7, I'm not going to go through all the levels. Um, Level 3 through 7 is what we call anabolic energy. Anabolic is more like a stream. There's growth, there's movement. That's where we want to be. When we first experience a loss, we are in levels 1 and 2. I mean, we have been a victim of something very painful. But we want to get to level 3. Level 3 is what's called the responsible person, and that's the beginning of anabolic energy. The responsible person says, I'm responsible for my life, my own happiness, my feelings, my thoughts, my actions. That's when people will reach out to their support system. They'll go to a support group. They'll reach out to therapy. They'll maybe talk to their doctor about medication. They begin making those choices. So whether it's a loss or something else in our lives, if we find ourselves in that victim mode, blame of self, blame of others, poor me, all you have to do is reach up and grab level 3. I'm responsible for me. Now we're in problem solving mode and we can start to heal and recreate our lives. So let's go back to the digestion. Level 3 takes choice. We have to choose that. That's our digestion, right? Choosing. Just like we have to choose to look at what's on the plate. In our grief, we have to choose not to stuff our grief, avoid our grief, or drown it with alcohol. I had a client who, for 3 years, he that's what he did with his grief. He stuffed it into the bottle. I had another client who kind of became agoraphobic and just isolated for 3 years. Fortunately, she kept my card that she had gotten from a lecture that I had done, and she called me, and we worked together for about a year and a half, and she got to that place of recreating her life after loss. Um, Next part of our digestion, we have to choose to pick up the food, right? Well, with grief, we have to choose to pick it up and look at it directly. It takes courage. There's a saying, courage is fear walking. We take our fear and we keep going. So even if we're afraid to look at all the different parts of our grief, it's important that we do that. Sometimes we can do that on our own. Sometimes we do it with a support group or a therapist. The next choice, we have to choose to put the food in our mouth. With our grief, we have to choose to create space for our grief and spend time with it and let ourselves feel it. Some people create an actual room or the corner of a room or a garden that's where they journal. I have a client who she has a corner in one of her rooms where her son's boots are. She had lost her son, and that's where his boots are. And she goes and she talks with them and she journals. So it's important that we create that time and that space. Next thing we have to do in the processing is choosing to chew the food, right? The digestion. We've got to chew it first. In grief, we chew on all of our woulda, coulda, shouldas. We grapple with it. We grapple with the guilt. We grapple with the anger. Because in doing so, then we can release it. Because we can break it apart enough to release it. The next choice is choosing to swallow our food. Well, that's when we choose the acceptance. We say, they're not coming back. I'm going to cooperate with the fact that they're not here in the tangible sense. But I'm also going to cooperate with the fact that that relationship will never be gone. We will always have a relationship with our loved ones. How do I reconnect? How do I remember them? And so that's that last piece. Then, right, we have to allow our digestion to work its process. And that's where time comes in. Time is just kind of a natural process. Time is part of the healing. It's not all of it, but it's part of it. And often during this time, I encourage my clients, I ask them, what can you do while you wait? While you wait for the tedium of the grief to begin to lift so that you can recreate your life. And people choose to do different things during this time. Sometimes I suggest to people, especially if like childhood stuff is showing up, and I'm sure everybody here, if they've worked with Vince at all, knows all about childhood work and the family of origin and all that. I say to clients, you're cracked wide open anyway. We can go in and we can heal some wounds from previous losses or childhood wounds. Those are the gifts in the ugly package that from the current loss that we have, we can actually find healing about other things as well. In fact, I have a couple right now who lost their son, and in our talking, some childhood stuff was coming up, and I said, "We can do that now while you wait." And they're both willing to do that and work on those things for themselves. So this is it's important that we allow ourselves to process our grief, and that takes effort. We have to come to a place where we sort out what is waste, what doesn't serve us, like woulda, coulda, shouldas, and anger. What is nutrition? What heals us? What enhances our lives? What can we learn from this experience? So that we can come through focused not on the death, but on the life that was lived and shared with our loved one. When we process our grief, we can make lemonade. We can't get rid of the lemons, we can't get rid of the pain, but we can dilute the bitterness by continuing to live life and putting one foot in front of the other. We can sweeten life by focusing on the living and making new memories while creating purpose and meaning. We can hold space for the pain of bitterness, the tedium of the blandness, and the joy of the sweetness. Just like that lemonade pitcher holds space for the lemon juice, the water, and the sugar. We can hold space for all of it rather than running from the pain, trying to extract the lemon juice. It doesn't work that way. So, this is how we avoid PGD, which is prolonged grief disorder, and we develop PTG, which is post traumatic growth, where we actually evolve through the process um, of digesting our losses. And in this way, we really are able to, to honor what we've lost and also honor the fullness of our own lives. So I hope that's helpful to you, whether you see some of yourself in some of this, or thinking of someone that you know that maybe you think, oh, they might have prolonged grief disorder because they're really kind of stuck in one of those places. And maybe you could share something with them that would be helpful. Uh, so I hope that's been helpful to you folks. I'm going to open it up if anybody wants to ask any questions or share anything, make any comments. Just raise your hand, I think, and then Azzy will unmute you.
Pat, I just want to ask the question because
Mhm,
it always bugs me. I asked it earlier.
mhm,
One of the biggest areas of doing grief work is dealing with trauma.
mhm,
Could be sexual abuse, could be a lot of different things, could be the loss of somebody close to you. But we go through a lot of traumas, and
mhm,
trauma a lot of times, I don't think that we understand the
mhm.
importance of the grief process is part of that.
Right, right.
Even just the sickness, especially
Mhm,
somebody young.
mhm. Well, it's kind of on both sides. If we have trauma, we can sometimes a part of trauma is loss, and part of loss can be trauma. So if we have trauma, let's say as a young child with abuse, the loss that goes along with that is a loss of innocence, right? Um, but one of the main things that we lose with trauma is safety, a sense of safety, a sense of not having to be post-traumatic stress disorder. People are often very hyper vigilant. What's next, what's coming next, and so they lose that ability to just relax and be. So one of the types of treatments that some people have had a lot of success with is what's called EMDR, eye movement. I really should learn what this acronym means, but it's a type of treatment that um, uses certain techniques to be able to, within the brain, kind of move where the experiences are so that they don't feel like they're current. You have a Vietnam vet who hears a firecracker and all of a sudden he's getting under a car because he's taking cover because he thinks it's a bomb. Because in that moment, it feels like it's right then and there. And so EMDR helps to move that. I have a woman who had a horrific experience of trauma with her son um, dying in his own hand right in front of her. And she's under, I mean, she should be in Ancora, you know, in the corner for what she experienced. But the EMDR really has been tremendously helpful to her. And we've been able to do our work because that those trauma images and all that are not coming in because the EMDR has been able to put them back to the day when it happened, not today. So that is one way that people can deal with the trauma. But also, whenever I have a client, I always make sure that we create a safety net first. Support systems. I give them different tools to be able to self-regulate with breathing and other type of mindfulness techniques and things because you have to be able to regulate. Like I said, courage is fear walking. So sometimes to process our grief is kind of scary. And so we need to be able to, rather than get scared of it and then say, I'm not going to do that, we have to be able to regulate. I'll give you a quick example. I had a client who had trauma around, was mercilessly bullied to the point of having a knife to his throat in school. And I had him do letter writing. And when he was trying to write the letter to the bullies, he wasn't going to send it. This was a processing tool. He would throw up every time. And so we talked about what would make him feel safe. And he happened to have a cat. And I said, when do you feel the safest and most relaxed? He said, when I'm sitting on my couch and the cat's on my lap. I said, try writing the letter with the cat on your lap. He was able to do it because he was able to create a feeling of safety. And so, that's a big part of it too. Whenever trauma is involved with a loss, because not all loss, there's no trauma involved with the loss of my father. He had Parkinson's. He lived a full life. He was 89, I think. Um, we had a good relationship. Like there wasn't trauma there. Not all loss has trauma. Um, and so, there was nothing more needed. I'm sad he's gone, but other than that, it's not complicated. But yeah, sometimes there's a trauma and you've got to create the ability to get safe. Not just a safe environment, but the ability to get myself safe internally. And that's important as you take someone through the process.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
You got somebody with a hand, Greg? Greg?
Yeah, I have a question. I think I'm in a prolonged grief
Mm,
disorder, but this is different than a death to a family or friends
mm,
or a loved one.
mm,
Uh, I have parental alienation or estrangement going on for my daughter has not talked to me in over 9 years.
mm,
She has, I have a granddaughter. My daughter's an adult. She's 37 and she lives about a half hour away in Gloucester County. But anyways, I reach out 2 or 3 times a year to her and my son, who lives in Texas. He has no children, but my daughter has an 8-year-old
mm,
daughter, my granddaughter, and a 5-year-old grandson. I've only ever received a photograph of
mm,
them. I've never had any allowable contact. My son overheard my ex-wife demeaning me to my daughter, saying, "Your father doesn't love you. He doesn't want to co-sign for your college loan, monetary reasons." And my daughter has clammed up on that because she believes that to be the truth. And it's poison from a bitter divorce. But I reach out with a text and a voicemail, and I have social workers. I've had some surgeries on my right heel. I have the social workers at the hospitals and the subacute rehabs, and I see a counselor from Center for Family Services weekly for telehealth counseling for depression. No, no psychiatric medications, just talk therapy.
Mm.
But I don't get any response when I reach out and say a 3 or 4 sentence. Hey, it's your birthday, Stephanie. Happy birthday. I love you. I hope all's going well in your life.
Greg,
Please let's
Greg,
heal.
let's go to the question on grief.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I'm just trying to express that I do reach out.
So it's what we call ambiguous loss, where the person's still alive, but you
Yeah,
have no contact. And so one of the things I would say is look that up, like learn about that and how people handle an ambiguous loss. So that's remember that term. Okay, that's
yeah.
something that you can do yourself. The other is, but it still is a loss, and so just like this process um, of coming to that acceptance of I've got to cooperate with it as it is, not as I wish it was, but as it is. As it is, she is not responding. But that doesn't have to keep you from living your life. And that's where we get stuck is it keeps us from living our lives. And that's got to be over here and your life has to be here. And that's where I'm saying we have to hold space for both. And if we're all wrapped up in our grief, we're not holding space for life. And we've got to be able to do both. Now, you're not closing the door. If someday she wants to knock on your door, you're willing to open it. But sometimes we have to close the door so that we can live our life, so that we don't keep looking out for them. Are they coming? Are they coming? We have to close the door and say, you know what? She's not here right now. I'm going to live my life. If she comes knocking, though, I will answer. Okay. So
So are you suggesting to stop reaching out occasionally?
um that's kind of up to you whether you reach out or not. But if every time you reach out, you go into a depression, I would say to stop reaching out.
Yeah, that's hard to do when it's a living person that you love and raised.
I understand, but our life is important too, and the other people in our lives are important too, and we can.
Yeah, it's not that I'm not living my life. It's that I'm not able to release the continuous pain at certain markers, holidays,
Yeah, and that's
birthdays.
well. Sometimes we remember we agree whether somebody's whether it's an ambiguous loss or a death. We're always going to have those times when we grieve.
Mm.
Those triggers. We're always going to have those. So don't be afraid of those. Those are going to happen. Every holiday you're going to get a little melancholy. But
Yes.
that doesn't mean you have to hold on to that melancholy. Ride that wave, but then when the holidays are over, get back to your living. We will always. I tell my parents who've lost children, I say, you will. I lost my infant son 23 years ago. I have a meltdown at least at least twice a year. I tell my parents who've lost children, you will have meltdowns periodically throughout the rest of your life. Don't be afraid of them. We will grieve forever. But that doesn't mean we can't also live. Okay. Anybody else have a question?
Leslie?
I don't know, not,
We
I'm
got you.
very hyper vigilant too, because I had multiple losses
Mhm.
when I was a child. I
Mhm.
had a brother die when I was 12 of this disease,
Mhm.
and then my uncle within the same year, and my grandfather from alcoholism all in the same year.
Mhm.
And then it was just constant losses throughout my childhood. So I feel like I'm hyper vigilant to my surroundings
Mhm.
and
Kind
highly
of waiting for the next person to die.
exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and that's where I would suggest either through a support group, or I don't know if you have a therapist, or would go to therapy. where you actually work through each loss individually. Process through it, look at it, write the letters, do with each one, and not be afraid of it, because it will actually lighten you, and then we can live with the loss instead of being. There's a difference between being stuck in the loss and living with it.
Yeah, because each loss opens the other wound, like when the cat
Yeah, and it's
died.
compounding. It's a compounding. Yeah.
Mhm.
And there are two other phrases that I want to put out there too, besides the ambiguous loss. Um, Complicated grief and complex grief. Complicated grief is usually, by its very nature, like when somebody dies young, right? That's complicated because that's not the natural order of things. Um, Complex grief is often when it's one loss after the other. You can't catch your breath, and you can't. Yeah. And so when that happens, when we realize that, we say, okay, I kind of need to go back, and I need to just work through each one. And I don't like the word closure. We have resolution around it, so that we can live with it. So I would suggest that you do that. You process through each one. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Pat.
Mhm.
Anybody else? One of the things we're going to be doing, though, just to let you know, Pat put this talk together on paper. So her and Azzy are going to work on getting it onto Vince's Corner. We'll have alternative resources at the bottom of Vince's Corner, so you can actually download it.
And as you will have hard copies at the desk, if you're more of a hard copy kind of person, just ask her for it. Just say the grief lecture by Pat. She'll know what it is. It probably won't be there for another week or so, because I have to kind of edit some things. But
She's going to add some support groups and stuff
yeah.
too.
Mhm.
Should be good.
Quick question. The groups, are you able to attend a group via Zoom, or do you need to be in person?
For Gary's group.
Right
The group-
now they are in person. There is no online group. We do have Gary Doc's grief group, but we also have another one. It's called All Recovery Grief Group, which is at 7 o'clock on Wednesdays here. So we have two of them.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
I'm also going to put on the with this lecture, the resources, some books, some websites, and some support groups. Brief support.
Terrific.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Nancy. Okay, anybody else? Go, Pat, thank you so much for finishing up our grief series, as you traditionally do.